Hi, my name is Christi, and this is my story. I was saved at the age of 8 after growing up in a very strict Southern Baptist home where our church was more known for what we were against than what we were for. So I don't have one of those stories where my life was a mess and then God came and rescued me and I became a Christian and then things were easier. The mess would come later. I decided at the age of 12 that I was going to be an attorney, and so I had a plan. I had a plan to go to law school and get out of law school, get a job, get married, and have my first kid by 25. And I knew that plan when I was 12. So I was extremely driven and nothing was going to get in my way. When I was going through college and law school, I met the man who would become the first of my 2 ex-husbands. This man was in my life at the right place in the right time. He was also going to law school, so on paper, it looked perfect. All through law school we dated, and there were definitely red flags in that relationship. The fights were visceral. There was a lot of verbal abuse that happened on both sides of the fence there. But I ignored those red flags because I had this plan. And I don't know, in looking back on it, if I ever even consulted God about that plan. I just knew that it was what I wanted to do. I didn't even think that this man was a Christian. And I grew up knowing that you shouldn't be unequally yoked. Nevertheless, we got married in 2002, right on target with the plan. And sure enough, 3 weeks before my 25th birthday, I gave birth to our first son. So a few years later, even though the marriage kept getting worse, we had our second son. And I remember feeling trapped. So with a lot of reservation, I left that marriage. So we divorced in 2010, and in March of 2010, that was final. Then in August of 2010, I met a bad boy. He was shaved head and all muscly, and he was tatted from head to toe, and I was completely enamored. He was everything that my first husband was not, including a Christian. I loved him, I loved his kids, I loved his parents, his family, all of it. Like, I loved just the whole package. We dated for 5 years off and on. Now, in hindsight, there were red flags on that as well. But again, I maintained even through those red flags that this was somebody I was supposed to marry. We did, in fact, get married in October of 2015, and within a few months, everything fell apart. Everything fell apart. Things were being done in my family that I had only seen on television or read about in books and thought, that's never going to affect me. That's never going to affect my kids. I mean, after all, I grew up in the church and I'm raising my kids in the church and we're taking all of our kids into church. So surely that kind of evil can't penetrate our home. But I will tell you that it absolutely does. We separated shortly after getting married and eventually reconciled. I think we reconciled because we were newly married. And I insisted on it. I insisted that we were going to make this work. We sold both of our houses and we moved into this gorgeous house to accommodate everybody. And within a couple of months of moving into that house, it all fell apart again. And I made my way into my first recovery room in September of 2016. And so God led me into this room where I was surrounded by these women who seemed to know exactly what kind of life I had been living the previous year. And they were encouraging, and they talked to me about God in a way that I had never heard before. I began spending time away with God and reading His Word and reading daily devotionals, and I changed the kind of music that I listened to. So although I began to have a peace on my own, my marriage continued to get worse and worse. I told my husband, who I loved with all my heart, even through everything, that things needed to change for our family, and they needed to change right away. To make a long story short, that marriage dissolved, and it dissolved like acid dissolves plastic. I remember sitting on my bedroom floor after I had moved, and just saying, like, God, where are you? Where are you? And just feeling him say, I'm right here. God was with me the whole time. God didn't prevent my bad decisions. He allowed me to make them. And he was there when I realized I needed to make some different ones. I remember talking to my mom one night, and I said, Mom, like, I just keep praying that God restores my marriage. Like, somehow, like, there's some miracle that happens and he restores my marriage. And my mom said, someday you'll actually start praying that he'll restore you. And when you ask him that, he will do that. And he absolutely did. I felt peace that even though who I was as a mom didn't look how I thought it was going to look, and the role of wife had been taken from me, I knew who I was. Those things are things that I do. They are not who I am. And then the story from Joseph kept kind of coming back in my mind. What you intended for evil, God intended for good. I knew what evil looked like, but I knew that God intended it for good. So it was a matter of figuring out what that good was. You know, how can God redeem that for me? I had been searching for the why for 2 years at that point. Like, searching for the why would I have been in that situation? Like, what's the purpose of all of that? How can God help me please understand how what man meant for evil, you're going to use for good. I walked into the first meeting of CR and there were maybe 10 people. And now every week we have at least 30, and that's after only a year. And I get the joy of walking with women who are coming out of abusive relationships, who are dealing with loved ones at home that suffer from addictions. And it makes all of it make sense. It doesn't take the hurt away, but it gives it a purpose. God uses all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. All of the things. The really stupid decisions that I make, the really stupid decisions that someone else makes that affect me. He uses my successes, he uses my failures, he uses the things I'm afraid to do. He uses all of it. And so it makes all of that worth it, because I get to see other people come to the other side of what that pain looks like. And that's the most rewarding experience I've had in my life. Hi, my name is Christi, and this is my story.